He had once been Dr. Victor Malgrave, a sculptor of flesh and bone. His hands, now stained with something darker than iodine, were celebrated for their precision. He was tall and gaunt, his face all sharp angles, a living anatomical diagram. Now only his eyes, burning with cold fire, hinted at the life that still animated him. Dr. Malgrave had been a man of science, a man of logic. He believed in the scalpel, not the soul. But life had a way of mocking such convictions. It carved away at him, whittling down his faith until all that remained was a bitter husk. He was no longer Dr. Victor Malgrave, he was Dr. Malice. He stalked the city streets, a predator in a tailored suit. The city was his hunting ground, its inhabitants both prey and jury. He would have his justice, even if it meant becoming the villain of his own narrative. His heart, once stirred by the rhythm of a human pulse, now throbbed to a different beat, the drumbeat of revenge. The operating room had been his sanctuary, the place where he defied death, but on that day, the fluorescent light seemed to hum with a malevolent energy, casting long, distorted shadows. It began like any other surgery, the sterile scent of antiseptic, a perverse perfume. He had been at the peak of his career, his name whispered with reverence in hospital corridors. Then came the slip. A tremor, so slight he barely registered it. But in the delicate dance between life and death, such nuances were catastrophic. The patient, a young woman with a radiant smile and a future full of promise, became another casualty on the operating table. The aftermath was a blur. The whispers turned to accusations, the reverence to revulsion. The newspapers splashed his name across their front pages, the ink stained with his failure, his career, his reputation, his life, all reduced to ashes in the blink of an eye. He had stared into the abyss after that fateful day. The abyss stared back, and in its reflection he saw not a fallen angel but a vengeful demon. He would not go quietly into that good night. He would rage against the dying of the light. He would become the instrument of his own justice. He delved into the forbidden texts of medicine, the ones that whispered of death and its many disguises. Poisons became his new instruments, their insidious nature a reflection of his own. He learned their secrets, how they coursed through the bloodstream, an invisible executioner. He chose his victims carefully, each one a thread in the tapestry of his downfall. The hospital administrators who turned a blind eye, the nurses who gossiped in hushed tones, the journalists who feasted on his misery. They would all pay. He would become the ultimate surgeon, excising the cancer that had poisoned his life. Section 4. Vitae Redditus. He worked with a chilling precision, his movements as calculated as a surgeon making an incision. Each death was meticulously planned, a macabre performance designed to send a message. He left his calling card at every scene, a syringe filled with a clear liquid, the words Vitae Redditus etched on its side, life's return. A cruel irony, considering the nature of his work. It was a taunt, a reminder that he held the power of life and death in his hands. The police were baffled. The press had a field day, but for Dr. Malice it was all part of the plan. He was writing his own narrative now, one syringe at a time. His victims were dying, one by one, their deaths as swift and silent as a whispered prayer. Fear snaked through the city, a cold, constricting grip, and with each life claimed, Dr. Malice felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He was a surgeon once more, but now he operated on the very fabric of society, carving away at its hypocrisy and greed. Section 5. Instruments of Vengeance. He knew poisons. He knew their histories, their nuances, the subtle ways they could unravel a life. Cyanide, swift and merciless for the hospital administrator who had publicly condemned him. Ricin, slow and agonizing for the journalist who had spun his tragedy into tabloid fodder. Each death was a carefully calibrated act of retribution. He worked in the shadows, his laboratory a hidden sanctuary where he communed with his dark muse. He had long since abandoned the sterile white of the operating room for the dimly lit corners of his mind. Here, amidst the beakers and Bunsen burners, he was both artist and destroyer. His victims were not random. They were interconnected, each one a player in the drama that had shattered his life. He studied their habits, their routines, their weaknesses. He became a ghost, flitting through their lives, leaving a trail of death in his wake.